is Gabriel Lucas, as Alan presented to me. I'm Associate Director at Redbridge. Let me first introduce Redbridge very quickly. So Redbridge is a consulting company specialized on payments, treasury, and data advisory. And we help our clients with everything related to payment strategy, but also cost optimization and revenue growth. So to give you a bit more of my background so that you can find a bit more relevant those insights, I've been working at payments for 7 years now. Before being a consultant, I was head of operations at a fintech based in Paris, mostly specialized on alternative payment methods. And since 3 years, I'm helping my clients, basically 100% merchants, defining their payment strategy. So today, I'm opening up this session regarding turning payment architecture into a competitive advantage. And first of all, let me show the question that I will be addressing. So first, I will try to answer this question with the definition: what is even payment architecture? Is that something related only to IT, or, as Alan was mentioning, or something else? Actually all the stakeholders within the company. Why is payment architecture even important for merchants? And how can we leverage this payment architecture as a competitive advantage? Then I will illustrate a little bit those cases with anonymous case studies from some of my clients, so that you can understand a bit more the insights that I will be going through. So first of all, what is payment architecture? So this definition that I made myself is just to illustrate the topic and make sure that we are aligned. Payment architecture is the carefully designed structure, so basically IT, allowing a merchant to accept payments or debiting a client that gave the agreement to be debited. So we are basically describing here customer-initiated transactions, merchant-initiated transactions. And before we go any further, I think it's important to understand what is the payment value chain in a rather simplified way, because payments, of course, is about collecting money and accepting payments, but it can become very complex when we look through the whole payment value chain. And this is mostly the case that I usually face with my clients. So pretty complex environments in terms of geographies, channels, countries, brands. So when we put all this mix together, the payment value chain very quickly becomes very complex. So first of all, the entry point. So the channels where your customers are paying. We have, of course, the POS and then the web and phone. And we are seeing how those channels are becoming more and more digital with the soft POS, for instance, at the POS. So everything is going towards digital. And that's why orchestration is definitely becoming a hot topic, something that would have never been included in this value chain a few years ago, but now is a key element of the value chain. Then we have the value-added services. So payments is no longer, in my view, about accepting and collecting money, but also to provide additional value services and revenue generation for merchants. And when I say revenue generation, you can, some of you may be familiar with dynamic currency conversion, tax-free services, or even other more B2B related services or marketplace related services such as dunning and automation in general from payments. Of course, as value-added services, we have the fraud management and anything related to subscription, which is a key topic where payments is the key element to ensure that the transaction goes through. Then we go to the more typical and well-known elements of the value chain, which are the processing. So the processing, which includes the gateway and the reconciliation, is the technical piece of the payments. And we move to the acquirer, where the funds are collected and the risk is managed by the financial institution. Sometimes, of course, all of them can be handled by the same player. We are, in that case, talking about full service provider, or you can go through the, towards the specialists that I will cover just a bit later. All that to accept the different payment methods. Historically, we had the few schemes, international ones and some local schemes, but we are, of course, seeing more and more alternative payment methods in this value chain. And this is evolving so quickly that it's really key to remain flexible in this context. And at the very end of the value chain, we have the issuers. For now, they are mostly known for being those, when it comes to acceptance, authorizing the payments, and the ones managing the risk and also triggering the strong customer authentication, especially when it comes to PSD2. But at the same time, issuers are now becoming part of some payment value chain when it comes to acceptance, especially on marketplaces or franchisees, where the merchant can issue some cards, either virtual or physical cards, to their vendors or franchisees, so that they can maximize the value of the whole transaction. So now, why is payment architecture important for merchants? Well, historically, we could think that payment architecture, as we were saying, was just a matter of IT. But we realize, it is not new, that there are many challenges where payments is involved, and therefore many different departments and stakeholders within this topic. So on the one hand, we have the external challenges. We have new payment options, customer behavior, pandemic changed everything. Everything is moving to digital channels. We all, as customers, we are being more and more demanding in terms of customer experience. And the regulation in every country and region is changing all the time and adding complexity to this environment. And on the other hand, merchants have to face the internal challenges, so many different priorities. You may be facing the data innovation. You may want to acquire new customers, so adding new payment methods, new value-added services. And on the other hand, you will have the finance saying that you need to reduce cost or keep costs under control. And also you need to deal with fraud and risk and security-related issues. So all this makes the equation quite complex. And you need to put all that together and prioritize your different topics so that you can create actually your roadmap and get to a certain point in a relatively short period of time. Otherwise, what we are seeing is merchants stuck with their payment architecture because they don't manage to put all those things together and prioritized. So one of the interesting questions is that I usually have from my clients, but if there was a simple question, then I would have probably have a job, so what is the best provider out there? Who should be talking with? There are many different players, banking players, non-banking providers. I wouldn't give it any name, but there are very well-known providers out there that say they do actually everything. But I think we are all we all agree that there is no one single provider that can cover everything, at least not everything the best way we can do it. So when we look at this context, we have on the one side the specialized providers. So those are players that are very good at what they do. But at the same time, you need to manage the complexity of having multiple providers, multiple invoices, contracts. Then you may also split the volumes. So you may struggle a bit more to negotiate, but this is something that can be definitely discussed. But of course, those specialized providers will give you this flexibility and the agility so that you can easily route or add the services that you need based on your specific needs for each market context that you have. On the other hand, you have the full service providers. So those providers that say that they do everything you need in terms of geographies, channels, payment methods. And of course, there are many providers that are very good at what they do, and they can cover almost everything in some contexts. But at some point, even if at the very first approach they can cover all your needs, you may probably optimize their services in a second stage. One risk that is quite important to consider when you go with a full service provider is the vendor lock-in. So when you depend on a single provider to handle such a key activity as collecting money from your customers, then if this provider is down, or if this provider is no longer giving you the service that you requested at that time, then you may struggle to get out of this provider. So there's the vendor lock-in risk to be considered. And this is something, of course, that we are seeing more and more. And many of my clients are really worried about vendor lock-in, especially when it comes to digital payments, where every second of having the platform accepting payments is key to keep the activity running. Then you depend on those providers' roadmap. So in case they don't provide anymore with the services you need, they are not quick enough or they even struggle from a financial point of view and they need to stop the activity, then you will be stuck. And most of the time what I see as well is clients paying for services that they don't really need. So it's great from some of the providers out there, all the services that they have, and it can really impress sometimes the different teams from marketing to finance. But at the end of the day, if those services are not really used, then what is the point on paying for those premium pricing services? So then, how can payment architecture become a competitive advantage? The way I usually approach this problem, because at the end of the day, what I'm doing every day is solving my clients' problems, is addressing this payment strategy from a holistic point of view. So you cannot only go to finance and say, okay, I want to optimize cost. And then you go to IT and you say, okay, I want this for tomorrow. And then you may have, at the end of the conversation, or even once everything is deployed, you may have your security or internal control saying that this is not in line with the internal policies in terms of risk. So for all those reasons, it's key to apply this 360 degrees methodology where you consider all the different components of the payment value chain in a way that you can address from an organization point of view. And you could say, it would be a fair question, why don't you put departments or functions instead of topics? And the answer is, at least my answer is, my view is that you cannot, depending on the organization, each department has different functions. And sometimes payments is more linked to one of the different departments. So it can be closer to finance or IT or business. So that's why I prefer to go through the different topics that you need to ensure that you cover rather than going through functions. So the first topic that you need to consider when you define your payment strategy, of course, is what are the payment methods that you will propose to your customers, and how can you maximize the acceptance of those payment methods. So here we are, of course, talking about acceptance rates, fallback strategies, retry strategies, and everything that comes to collecting money, and also improving your working capital, collecting money and collecting faster the money. Then to propose those payment methods, you need to define your payment architecture, which is the main topic for today, and the internal processes that you need to think about. So I'm sure many of you have faced the problem of adding a new payment method and then reconciliation is not even defined. So how can you add a new payment method and then struggle with the reconciliation? You may have your finance team saying, okay, I can't, I just stop this payment method because I cannot reconcile. And then from an IT perspective, IT is usually very busy. We know that it's one of the most raw resources that we have in our current situation when it comes to payments, fintechs, and everything related to financial services. So you need to ensure that IT is involved in the decision-making process and that you can consider their constraints and the complexity they need to face so that they can be rather an ally than a blocking point when it comes to payment transformation. You need to consider as well security, compliance, and fraud management, because otherwise you are exposing your business to the risk. So adding a new payment method that is bringing too much risk is definitely not what you're looking for. And all that you need to put in perspective of the cost optimization. So what is the best cost, the right pricing that you should be paying for those services? Can you even optimize your costs further? Can you generate further revenue with any of the value-added services? And then once you've defined everything, you need to go out there and see what are the best partners you can have a contract with. And what is the best setup, whether it's one single provider, many providers, specialists, value-added services, and so on. So now I'm going to give you a few examples of payment architecture in a pretty simplified way so that everyone can understand a bit more what we are discussing today, and also with a few case studies with different objectives and therefore different results. So some examples of payment architecture. I've simplified the value chain that we presented earlier on the most obvious payment components, which are the entry point, so the channel where your customers are paying, the gateway, so the technical piece of the payment, where you route your payments to the acquirers, and then the acquirers, so the financial institution in charge of collecting the money, setting the money to you, and managing the risk. Usually, the complex organization start at some point from the very decentralized organization, and sometimes it can make sense. It can be for organizational reasons. Teams are so decentralized and activity is so local that there's no point on rationalizing, aggregating, having an international player to deal with something that is so local, like in Poland or France or the UK, whatever. But yeah, time is over. But one thing that we didn't mention is that our second speaker is not presenting today, so we'll run a bit more this presentation than the panel discussion. So yeah, so from decentralized, then sometimes it makes sense to go to a more centralized architecture. It can be centralized at the gateway level and then keep the local acquirers, or it can be centralized from a full service perspective with a player handling both processing and acquiring. And then you can do it either by channel or you can run everything as a whole. And at the very end, we have the orchestration layer, for now only available for digital payments, but we are seeing more and more orchestrators going into the POS world, especially at the soft POS world. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what those orchestrators will have to offer in the upcoming months and years, because the time they really connect to the whole architecture and they can connect to any entry point, I'm sure the whole ecosystem will really change. So the first case study that I'm presenting today is a client that wanted to really streamline the customer experience. It was an international luxury group selling mostly at the physical store, and they wanted to develop as well the e-commerce channel. So what they did is we basically we define the main priorities. We consider everything we've been discussing today, and then we run a global RFP where we included local providers, global providers, and we compare the pros and cons in terms of value-added services, payment methods, cost. And one important piece here was to integrate everything quite easily to their ERP, which was Cegid. And the result for this whole project was to select 3 main global providers, one of them running around 70% of the business, and having all of them connected to Cegid with a native integration. The second case study, nothing to do with a luxury player. It was more a retailer, and retailers usually look at cost optimization. So the main objective here was to reduce cost, and the strategy that was defined and that we explored together during the RFP process was to look for a on-us strategy. For those that are not familiar with on-us is basically where acquirer and issuer are the same, so that you can negotiate usually further because interchange and pricing are going to the same player. This is, by the way, not a rule. This is something that needs to be negotiated, and sometimes you cannot even get it. But this is the option we explore, and with the volumes and the appetite for those acquirers, we managed to do it. So here we reduce, thanks to the RFP, the pricing, the overall pricing, and we also reduce the overall cost because the interchange could be reduced thanks to on-us. And then the last case study was for a international rental group that have a very, very decentralized and complex organization in terms of brands, in terms of channels, with more than 150 countries, including fully owned entities, but also franchisees. And here we explored 2 scenarios, one being full rationalization, but at the end, full rationalization was not really possible. So what we did is to rather go for the selection of an orchestration provider, so that this orchestration provider could integrate all the current providers, and so that it could become a transition towards the next payment architecture. So going through the orchestration layer to connect to all the existing providers, so that after that, those providers could be more easily challenged. Also worth mentioning that this merchant was really in a process of digitization, and orchestration really made sense because point of sale transactions are meant to disappear at some point. So this is the third case that I had today. The three of them are quite different. So you can see how the first one is really on customer experience and rationalization for when it comes to reconciliation, especially on the ERP. Second one being on cost optimization, and this one being more on remaining flexible to address complexity and evolution of this environment across the world. So what are the conclusions for all I've been presenting today? First, what is payment architecture and why is important? So payment architecture is something that you really need to consider. You really need to define what is your target payment architecture. You need to understand why this is important. So you need to consider all the challenges that you have. You need to make sure that you coordinate your internal departments, that everyone can really say a word. And then how can you put all this in place and implement this really tough process? You need to make sure that you identify your needs, that you prioritize your needs across the different departments, and sometimes you need to make compromises. And then you need to go out there and see with your existing partners, but also with the new providers out there, what are the real capabilities in the market. And things that I didn't mention because it was too deep into details, but for instance, when it came to this third case study, there was much more complexity than a simple orchestration layer. We had to deal with a token provider, how to reduce PCI exposure. So sometimes it's really, really complex, and you need to validate with the market what is feasible. So what are the actions? My suggestion for all merchants here today. So you define your target, you prioritize your roadmap, and then you select the best providers that can help you today while remaining as flexible as you can. And then you need to monitor and keep improving, because this is a continuous exercise. Maybe what is good today won't be good tomorrow. So definitely, this sort of a continuous improvement plan is key on payments. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.